For my change project, I wanted to increase student attitudes and engagement during independent reading time. To do this, I decided to use the Raz-Kids online reading program to supplement traditional independent reading. I started this project in September of 2013 and worked on it through June of 2014. To begin this change project, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the demographics of my school and of my class. This year, I was lucky to have only 20 second grade students at the beginning of the year, and it increased to about 22 students towards the end of the year. 4 students in my class were receiving special education services. 2 were also getting speech services. At the beginning of the year, 4 students were also receiving response to intervention or RTI reading services. RTI reading services changed throughout the year depending on the need of my students, but it maintained to be about 4 students each session. This change project took place at Hoover Elementary, located in the Wayne Wesleyan School District. Hoover is a very low-income school and struggles with parent involvement. The advantage of working with this class is that I have known these students for 2 years prior. 2 years back, I taught kindergarten when these kids were in kindergarten. I took my kindergarten students with me to first grade last year and looped with them. Then when I found out I was moving to second grade, we split up my first graders into the 2 other second grade classrooms. This allowed me to get a whole new set of kids, meaning that for this whole group, I've taught 2/3 of them. I decided to work on this change project when I noticed problems during traditional independent reading time. In my classroom, we run the Daily 5 framework. During Daily 5, my students go through 5 rounds of work. 1 is read to self, 1 is working on writing, another is word work, technology time, and finally teacher time. When my students come up for teacher time, they're working on small group instructions for reading with me. I noticed problems during read to self, which is traditional independent reading time. Students had a lot of trouble staying on task. Students' attitudes and motivation completely decreased. Some students were not progressing through reading levels as they should, and I was beginning to worry. I often heard excuses like, "I'm bored, I don't like these books," and it was affecting all of the other rounds of Daily 5. Often I would have to stop my small group instruction and focus on the group who was working on read to self. It took a lot of time away from small group instruction and the students who really needed extra help. I decided to use Raz-Kids online reading program because I had heard about it when my niece was using it in first grade. It's very cool because it's online, it's available in school or at home, and it's very interactive. There is a book room where students can listen to stories, read them on their own, and take quizzes to check their understanding. Each time a student completes these tasks, they get a check mark under each category. As they earn check marks, students earn points. These points can be used in the Raz Rocket, where students can spend their points from reading on creating robots and spaceships. Students must listen to the story, read the story on their own, and pass the quiz for every book before they can move on to the next reading level. There is also an interactive message center where students can find positive encouragement from parents and their teachers. There is also a feature to give individualized assignments to each student. Students record their voices and turn in their assignment through Raz-Kids. Teachers can then take the assignments that the students have completed and use them for running records to check students' progress. Raz-Kids also has tons of features where they will provide you with data on how many times the kids have logged in, how they are passing the tests, if they're struggling in certain areas. It's awesome data that they can use on a daily basis. To continue this project, I'm going to talk about the triangulation of data. The first form of data are tools for everyday life. To keep this data, I kept a daily journal to document the implementation, students' interactions with Raz-Kids, and also problems that occurred along the way. The second form of data is tools for questioning. To survey my students, I used the Elementary Reading Attitude Survey, and it was given as a pre, a mid-year, and post-assessment questioning tool. Finally, the existing data included the Developmental Reading Assessment, or DRA levels, to differentiate the website for each student. My big question was, will the use of RazKids impact second grade students' attitudes and achievement during independent reading? I started collecting data by giving my students the Elementary Reading Attitude Survey. For the pre-assessment, I decided to use all 20 questions of the survey. Out of the 20 survey questions, the following 9 areas were the ones that were more clearly focused on reading while in school. These areas included how students felt when they read a book in school during free time, about reading in school in general, about starting a new book, about reading different kinds of books, when a teacher asks you questions about what you read, about learning from a book, about reading your school books, how students feel when it's time for independent reading in class, and also how they felt about stories that were read out loud in class. As you can see, the first 5 data points rated the highest among students. Also, 60% of students disliked leveled reading books and the stories that were read during reading instruction. 40% of students disliked learning from a book, while 55% of students disliked independent reading time in class. After looking at this data, I was excited to see what impact RazKids would have on my students' attitudes about independent reading time. Now let's move on to the implementation of my project. To start, the pre-assessment survey was administered to collect data. I then met with the media teacher, literacy consultant, and my principal to create a plan. I decided that my students would use RazKids during Daily 5 every other day for 15 to 20 minutes for the whole school year. Because of this, my students accumulated about 1,350 to 1,800 minutes of time on RazKids during the entire change project. Students were able to listen to, read stories themselves, and also take quizzes to check for their understanding. They were also allotted time to work in the Raz Rocket room where they could create different types of spaceships with the points that they've earned. I also provided them with assignments directly at their reading level. They were asked to record themselves reading and turn it in through RazKids. It really gave me the chance to see how my kids were reading more often, since in second grade we're working more on comprehension than on strict reading skills. The students continued RazKids in combination with iPod work during technology time during Daily 5. RazKids became part of our Daily 5 routine, and my kids loved it. They really hated when they couldn't work on it each day. This slide shows my students' interactions with RazKids. As you can tell, they are completely engaged in what's happening on the computer. The top 3 pictures are showing the 3 desktop computers that are found within my classroom. The first picture is the one that's located on my desk, the teacher computer. The 2 girls are working on the 2 computers that are for students. At the beginning of the year, I wanted my students to have a lot more time getting used to RazKids. I decided that I would bring in some of our netbooks to help out. The bottom 2 pictures show students using the netbooks during the first half of my change project. Once NWEA testing started and MEEP testing started, it wasn't as easy to get the laptops anymore. We decided to stick with just the 3 desktop computers that were found within our classroom. That's why students took turns working on them every other day. But my students were highly engaged with RazKids throughout the whole project. Even if they couldn't use it every single day, they were excited to be on it every other day. Next, let's talk about the mid-year assessment data. This data was collected in December for EDU 5710. When you looked at the pre-assessment data, you noticed that there were 6 positive areas. Within these 6 positive areas, my students' feelings increased 15% in reading during free time, in reading during school, and also in reading different kinds of books. There was also a 25% increase in feelings about learning from a book, and 5% increase in starting a new book. When you looked at the pre-assessment data, you noticed that there were 3 very negative areas where my students had very high percentages of dislike. The mid-year assessment data showed a 25% decrease in dislike of independent reading, and also a 45% decrease in dislike of reading in school and of stories read in class. I was excited to see that RazKids was making a positive impact overall on all 9 areas of data. Now let's take a look at the year-end assessment data. After really looking at the data, you notice that all areas increased from pre to year-end assessment data. There was a 5% increase in feelings towards teachers asking questions about what you read. There was a 20% increase in feelings about reading during free time. There was a 15% increase in feelings about starting a new book and also reading different kinds of books. There was a 25% increase in feelings towards reading in school. There was also a 30% increase in feelings towards learning from a book. Finally, there was a 45% increase in feelings about reading school books, of stories read in class, and of independent reading time in general. These results shocked and astounded me. I knew that RazKids was going to have an impact on my students, but I didn't realize that it was going to change the way they viewed independent reading completely. It allowed them to have access to more books than I could ever provide them. So let's talk about these year-end results. The addition of RazKids has helped increase positive behaviors towards independent reading hugely in my classroom. I don't ever hear that students are bored or they don't like the stories that they're reading anymore. I have not had to stop working with my small groups to fix things that were happening during read to self time. They're completely engaged and interacting with the program, and they don't get that during traditional independent reading time. Also, like I've said, RazKids provides a huge range of books at student levels. I would never be able to purchase the amount of books that are available to them online. There are fiction books and nonfiction books. There are books in every single genre, and my students are excited to read every single one of them. They also started making connections between the books that they were reading online. Many of them are written by the same author. I would hear all kinds of stories about all the books that they had read from a specific author. Finally, the interactive quizzes help students gauge their understanding. If a student fails a quiz, they can take it over and over again until they fully know that they have passed the test. They can read books multiple times until their understanding is complete. I think that adding technology to independent reading time is a must for this generation of students. They don't learn the same way we did, and we need to change our way of teaching to fit their needs. They are technology-driven students, and this project proves it to me. Now on to the implications of this project. RazKids comes at a price. If you are trying to buy RazKids for 1 to 9 classrooms, it'll cost you $99.95 per classroom. If you would like to purchase it for 10 to 49 classrooms, the price drops to $84.95 a classroom. Given the shortage in funding, it may be difficult to get this for your entire school, but it was definitely worth me purchasing it for this year's class. Also, it seems easy to incorporate a website just into your reading program, but technology can complicate things immensely. If you don't have enough technology and the students don't have access, there's no point in paying for RazKids. Also, high-quality headphones are key. To get the headphones that you saw in the pictures, I decided to create a Donors Choose project. I worked hard to get the project funded quickly so that my kids would have the headphones at an early date. If you're planning on using Raz-Kids in your classroom, I would definitely put a Donors Choose project together over the summer so that it would be funded by the time school starts. Also, you must find time to make sure that all students have adequate exposure. This became difficult during MEP testing and NWA testing time because the technology was taken. You have to make it work in your classroom, even if you only have 3 computers like I did. Also, having help makes things run easier. This year, I had a para for one of my students, and she was able to help them with the technology at the beginning. Once students really learned their logins and got comfortable with Raz-Kids, everything ran easier, and having extra help wasn't as big of a problem, but it can definitely help at the beginning of the year when you're starting to get things off the ground. Finally, I believe that consistency is key. The students need a schedule that they can stick to throughout the entire year. They can also work at school and online at home, and there's a parent component with a page that you send home so that parents have the login ready to go. I had many students use Raz-Kids at home. Finally, will Raz-Kids work for your students? I believe that Raz-Kids could work for any students from K through about 5th or 6th grade. It's engaging, it's fun, it's interactive, and there are so many stories that all students will be able to find something that they like to read. I'm definitely going to try it out next year with my new group of 2nd grade students. I want to see if it was just the students that I had this year or if it can make an impact on all students. I would also really like to see how it works for different grade levels. To finish up, I have a link that you can click on to go see what Raz-Kids is like. You'll get to see how engaging and fun reading can be online. Thank you for listening to information about my Change project. I hope it gets you thinking about using Raz-Kids in your own classroom.